Hello and welcome to Through the Bible with Les Feldick. An Oklahoma rancher and farmer, Les Feldick has been teaching homestyle Bible classes for 20 years in Iowa, Oklahoma, and Texas. Les Feldick's unique style of Bible teaching has made the books of the Bible come to life. When Les is teaching, it's so interesting that people say time just seems to fly by. And now, here is Les Feldick.
All right, good to see everybody still with us. This is half hour number 4 already, so we'll be looking right back. We left off in Romans chapter 4. Again, we always like to welcome our television audience and also those of you who order the tapes. I think the tapes are probably reaching almost as many people as television. But we'd like to remind you that we have the books available. They're word-for-word transcriptions of the programs. They are taken right off the videotape, and so both are available. You can call us or write to us, and we'll send you out the list. The table of contents is the way we prefer to do it, and then you can order from that according to what might interest you the most. Again, we always like to remind our listeners we're just an informal Bible study, much like I've always held in homes and various places. We do not just trumpet any one group, or we do not criticize any group, but we just try to teach the book and help you to understand when you read. All right, let's get right back where we left off, and that would be in Romans chapter 4, verse 5. And we're talking now about Abraham, of course, who was steeped in idolatry as a young man in the city of Ur, and whereupon God reached down in grace and told him to leave the city, leave his family, and go to a place that he would show him, and Abraham believed God. And that's why I put these two statements on the board. The vast difference between believing God, which becomes faith, or just simply believing in God, which is a recognition that He's out there someplace, but who am I to have anything to do with Him? That's usually the attitude. But now we come down to verse 5, where Paul again has built his case that Abraham was declared righteous only because he believed God. Now we're going to carry that a little further in these succeeding verses. But now in verse 5, but to him who worketh not, but believeth on him who justifies the ungodly, and that's where we finished our last program. Remember, God cannot justify righteous people, that is, self-righteous people. God cannot deal with someone who sees no need. God can only deal with the person who recognizes that he is without God in this world. He needs Him. And then, of course, He immediately responds. So, when you believe on the one that can justify ungodly people, then that faith, that kind of believing, is counted. Now, that word counted here comes from a Greek word that was a bookkeeping term, and it's used many other places in Romans as imputed, put to the account. In fact, let me show you the same word in a setting that's so easy to understand. Come all the way back to the little book of Philemon. The little book of Philemon, which is just ahead of the book of Hebrews, only one chapter long. And it's the same identical word, and yet here is used in a way that we can readily understand the setting. Now, if you remember, Philemon had been a slave, and he had run away from his owner, Onesimus. And while he was gone from his stint in slavery, and he had come across Paul's gospel, he became a believer, and now Paul says to be an obedient believer, he should go back to his master, Onesimus. But he doesn't want Onesimus to come down on him as a disobedient slave, and so he's pleading with Onesimus to accept the man back and without any punishment. All right, then if you come into verse 18 of Philemon, this is such a beautiful illustration of the word imputed as we see it in Romans. Oh, let's just drop in at verse 15, where Paul says, well, perhaps he, speaking of Philemon, therefore departed for a season. He had run away from his slave owner, that thou shouldst receive him back forever, not now as a servant, no longer as just another one of the slaves, but above a servant, a brother. Beloved, especially Paul says to me, but how much more unto thee, both in the flesh and in the Lord. Now you see, Onesimus has a real servant. He's not only a servant for his physical needs, but he's also a fellow believer. And that would give them a fellowship, see? Now verse 17. If thou count me therefore a partner. In other words, Paul is dealing with Onesimus on like ground. If thou count me therefore a partner, receive him as myself. In other words, what's Paul saying? When Onesimus, or when Philemon shows up at your house, open the door to him like you would if it were me. That's what Paul is asking. All right, now the next verse, verse 18. If he has wronged thee, or oweth thee aught, put that on my account. Now what's he talking about? Impute it to me. That's the term. Paul says, if Philemon owes you anything of monetary value, don't exact it from him. After all, he was still just a common slave. But Paul says, put it to my account, and I'll pay it when I see you. Now, it's the same Greek word that we see back here now in verse 5 of Romans 4 as counted. It's imputed. In other words, how can I put it? Here, as an unbeliever, we have this long list of debts that there's no way we can pay. It's just a burden that there's no way we could ever pay it off. But by virtue of our believing the gospel, what has God done with that debt? Canceled it. And on the other side of the ledger, God puts the whole bankroll of heaven to our account. Now that's beyond our comprehension. But that's what salvation does, see? It cancels our sin debt. Never again will God confront any believer with his sin. I'll remember years ago, I was asked to call on a couple who had been going through some trying times, and the husband was in a debilitating disease, and I didn't know them that well. I'd never met them before, but I stopped by from the insistence of some of their friends just to encourage them a little bit. And as the lady of the house escorted me to the door as I was leaving, she said, "Les, is this because of some horrible sin in our past?" Now wait a minute. Are you believers? Oh yeah. Do you know the Lord has saved you? Yeah. No doubts? No doubts. I said, then don't you know what the Scripture teaches? That all your sin has been forgiven? It's been wiped off the slate. Never will you be confronted with sin. If the Lord should come this very moment, and you and I have done something this forenoon that was wrong, and we haven't even had time to confess it, are we going to come up in the Lord's presence and have Him say, wait a minute, that Wednesday forenoon you sinned and you haven't taken care of it? No. No, we're forgiven the moment we sin. And oh, this is hard for people to comprehend. They say, well, that's license. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. That's not license. That's just simply the grace of God that says God will never come back at us and accuse us of still having sin on our ledger. It's been wiped clean. And opposite now, like I said, the whole bankroll of heaven has been put to our account. And what am I talking about? God's righteousness, see? All of God's righteousness has been imputed to our account. That's what it says concerning Abraham. All right, let's read on. Verse 7. Verse 6, I'm sorry. Even as David. Now, the Old Testament economy, when it comes to forgiveness and salvation, as I've said so often, is hard to put your thumb on it. It's just hard to reckon some of these things. They had salvation, no doubt about it. But it wasn't as delineated as we see it now in Paul's teaching. For us, I mean, the whole thing is just laid open and it's explained and we can understand it. But nevertheless, there was still a salvation in the Old Testament that Paul can go back and relate to. And he even uses David. And we don't ordinarily think of David as the man of faith that Abraham was, but here's what it says. Even as David also describes the blessedness or the happiness of the man unto whom God imputeth, there's that word again, puts to the account, righteousness without what? Works. See? God imputes righteousness without our doing a thing. Now let's not confuse that with Christian good works. Turn with me now, hold your hand in Romans, we'll be back. Ephesians, verses that almost everybody knows. Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10. Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10. And again, you don't have to be a theologian to understand these. These are so simple. Ephesians 2, verse 8. For by grace. See what we've been talking about back there in Romans? The unmerited favor of God. For by grace are you saved by what? Faith. See? We're saved by grace through faith. And that not of yourselves. In other words, not anything that you and I can do. Again, I got to take you back to Israel on the shore of the Dead Sea. They couldn't do a thing. All right, let's read on. It is the gift of God. And just ask yourself, do you work for a gift? Do you merit a gift? Never. Then it would no longer be a gift. But that's what salvation is. It's a gift. It's something you do not work for. But let's not put that in the wrong context now. Verse 9, not of works, lest any man should boast. There's that same thing that he said concerning Abraham in Romans 4. But now look at verse 10. As a result of our faith, as a result of the finished work of Christ being accomplished on our behalf, and it is now appropriated by our faith, God has imputed His righteousness to our account. But what does He expect? We are His workmanship. In other words, when God saves us, He doesn't leave us like a wreck. What does He do? He makes us a new person. He gives us a whole new personality. We're not the old person that we used to be. So we are a created thing. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the word workmanship is also, now I stand to be corrected if some Greek scholar is out there, but if I'm not mistaken, this word workmanship has the same Greek connection as our word symphony. And I like that. Because a symphony, now a lot of people don't like symphony music anymore. They'd rather listen to this other stuff, but I still like a beautiful symphony orchestra. I think it just has sounds that are unbelievable. Now in that symphonic music are all these various types of instruments. And they all meld together for that beautiful sound. Now, what brought all that together? The composer. As he sat and was able to put all these notes, and this is a miracle to me, how these men can do that, but sit there and put all the scores of all these various instruments together, and they all play it, and out comes this beautiful music. Now that takes something.